Hi, everybody, and welcome to webinar number 4 in a series of 4, where we are privileged to have Sue Bottrell, who's Director for Contractor Safe, as you can see on the screen, a well-known lawyer and chartered health and safety professional. So before, we've been exploring concepts of pre-qualification, of onboarding, of monitoring. And this one really is just to close, in fact, Sue's put it in the title, like closing the loop, close the due diligence loop. So this is really about how do we do a review once contractors have done work for us, or it might be contractors on long-term contracts, because, you know, construction has lots of maintenance contracts. But, you know, so periodically, how do we review that performance, probably from both sides? And then how do we get what we've learned and put that to good use so there's some value to this? So, that's my intro. So as usual, I'll just hand straight over to Sue and we'll get cracking with this due diligence stuff.
Cool.
Hey.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so webinar 4 out of the 4 pillars. So pillar 1, pre-qualification, pillar 2, onboarding, pillar 3, monitoring, and pillar 4 is performance review. And I have to say, performance review is probably the pillar that is done least in terms of ongoing contractor management. But look, what we'll do is we'll just quickly recap on the last session, which we talked about meaningful monitoring, and really where we just looked at meaningful monitoring, which is, you know, looking at compliance with your systems and safety arrangements. So the sort of things that you've been instructing your contractors about, but also identifying the issues that you need to address. So to make sure your contractors are safe, the best time to do it is in real time, looking at what is critical to you. So what are your critical risks? What are the critical risks being created by your contracts, but also what you're competent to look at. Make sure you're monitoring, you know, you're not straying into areas where you really don't have the competency to be considering, and doing something with the information. So giving feedback and taking action. And really about cooperating together to identify and develop issue and have an issue resolution process. So yeah, webinar 4, performance review, closing the due diligence loop. So if we think back to the beginning of the 4 pillars, the first element, pre-qualification, is really a due diligence step. It's saying, okay, we've got a process by which we're going to hire contractors. We're going to ask them for some assurances about the work they do, their management of safety, and not just, you know, pick the cheapest who can do the job the quickest or whatever. And really this is taking us back to that process without reviewing the pre-qualification process. It is actually about saying, let's look at what the relationship has looked like, what how's safety gone during that process, and make some conscious decisions about whether or not we're going to continue to use contractors, whether or not there are actions that need to be taken by us and the contractor or the contractor to improve safety. So yeah, we'll have a think about, why do we undertake performance reviews? What would be a perfect performance review? How to conduct meaningful performance review, and how to review outcomes and actions. And I think that one of the questions there is, do you undertake regular performance reviews? And I often find clients say, no, we don't. You know, we hire a contractor, we bring him on board, and unless something goes really wrong, they're in and they just stay.
Full disclosure here, Sue. I think I'm just being really honest here. I don't think I've ever participated in a contractor performance review process ever. I don't think I've ever been asked to participate in one. I've been very much involved in the other elements of contract health and safety management that you've described, 2 involved in pre-qualification, probably 2 involved in monitoring from a client point of view. So I've probably been getting my hands in there where I shouldn't, you know, 2 involved in induction by giving people training rather than, but this bit often not invited to. And I wonder whether that's, you know, common with others, because I mean, we've had discussions in between things, and I've said to you before that I've found that this bit, the review, tends to be more commercial.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And and you're quite right. Whenever I look at material that's provided to me by clients, look, essentially it's commercial and quality. That's what we look at. You know, did they meet the deadline? Was it under budget? Was it what we asked to be built? Or, you know, so it's quality and commercial. And that is really where this focuses, rather than going back and saying, well, how did we go in a safety sense? And
Is there an underlying question? Sorry, you know what I'm like, it comes in my head and it has to come out of my mouth. Just an underlying question here then is that we're talking about performance review.
Mhm.
And is it because, number one, you know, what do we mean? Because we're talking under the lens of health and safety, right? So what do we mean by health and safety performance?
Yeah. Yeah. And what we normally do is look at lag indicators. We normally say, oh, how many injuries did they have? How many lost time injuries? Was there any serious injuries? That's what we basically rely on. And it's such a blunt instrument, because what if a contractor thinks that they're getting more work is going to be impacted by how many injuries they have? What are they going to do?
Well, they're not going to have any that you know about, right?
That's right. They're not going to tell you. You're not going to know about injuries, and they're not going to tell you. So it is a very, very problematic figure. Very, very
I
problematic.
wrote this on a comment on LinkedIn, Sue, recently, similar piece, because the other side to this is if, and probably more common this, that actually a contractor comes and does work and no one gets harmed, because that happens a lot, right? We don't hurt people all the time, particularly the serious ones, they're really infrequent. And my analogy to that is that, okay, so you haven't harmed anyone, and then we equate that to good performance. It kind of reminds me of that, you know, fictitious scenario of a guy throwing himself off a multi-story building and halfway down just going, yeah, okay, so far.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Not really
that's right.
performance. It's just a point in time piece. We're just waiting for something else.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's, I do struggle with the whole lag indicator thing, where it's, oh, lag indicators are terrible. Look, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to achieve, is less people being injured. There's no getting away from that. That is the ultimate goal, is less people being injured. It comes down to, numbers, but what is achieving that is all the stuff we do on the way through, and measuring the other indicators that will result in that outcome. By just focusing on the number of injuries that have been had, as we said, it can be a very false figure around what has actually occurred, because there are motivations for including or not including numbers, all those drivers. But it also tells us nothing about the context, or nothing about what that contractor is actually doing, to what processes are in place to for prevention. But the other thing as well is it's such a basic number. It doesn't tell us anything about what our involvement was. And you would have noticed the thread through all of my work is take the log out of your own eye. Really, it's saying you need to be engaging in a contractor in a way that really puts what am I doing front and center. And so performance review needs to look at our own performance as well as that of the contractor. How did we actually go? But obviously one of the main elements or main aspects of performance review is about saying, look, we need to continually demonstrate due diligence, so that we've made some sufficient inquiries in the first instance about what a contractor has in place, and we continue to make those inquiries to continue to make decisions about whether or not we will work with a contractor. And you can demonstrate your due diligence. And in a legal sense, there is nothing worse than a serious injury occurring and then it coming to light that it was known that a contractor was unsafe and was not managing safety, and then a serious incident occurred and the principal contractor had knowledge of that, and you kind of go to, is it condonation, are we condoning certain activity, all that kind of stuff. So to my mind, when I sort of first, I suppose, developed the 4 pillars model, I just went, this is a massive hole and so few organizations do it. because it is like, oh, you're on the books, and until something goes wrong, I'm not going to worry too much. And as say, you have no idea whether or not something's just sitting there waiting to go boom. So really, it's about sort of going, okay, we need to do it. And, you know, it is a critical process to demonstrate that you close the due diligent loop, confirm that you are satisfied your contractors are performing as you expected, you know, provides evidence of a duly diligent contractor, and is the opportunity to discuss what we as a principal contractor can do to support our contractors in their management of safety. So it's that both sides of the lens as well, and making sure that you know, we're looking at ourselves as well as our contractors.
I mean, such a simple point, Sue, but actually not being that obvious to me in the past. You know, if I, as I say, I can't really talk with any authority because I've never been involved in a review, so I'd be the wrong person to think that I'm sorry on that. But
It's really, it's funny
uh,
because I liken it to, you know, the performance reviews that happen as an employee. You know, okay, and who put your hand up if you've ever had a good performance review. Not me. They are the worst processes. They're usually done on the run. It's like, oh my God, you know. So even in that context, they're not done well. So there's some there's some forgiveness around. It's hard to do it with your contractors. These things take time. You know, these things, we have to set aside time. We have to, the contractor has to set aside time, and it can be hard to do, and it's just not high on people's radar. And unfortunately, it's sort of how we live our lives. You know, what is it? No news is good news. And
so I think you might have come up with a really good analogy there, because, you know, you think about performance reviews, and I've done some with others and I've had it done to me, and I agree that it's not a pleasant process a lot of the time. And I found the bit that's not pleasant is the paperwork bit. The discussion's normally okay, but again, it talks to your point, which is, if I'm being honest, when I've done performance reviews with people that work with me, you know, it's always been fixed on their performance. And it's never really been a 360 look to say, but how am I going as your manager? You know, and I suppose that's the point you're making about this, right? Is that, and I think it's a really important point, because I think it's something that may be overlooked quite commonly, is how are we going as a client? And it just links into that fact that, you know, I say this a lot, that if you're engaging other people to do work, you're reliant on them being successful, because that's how your business is successful. So if their success is important, we want to know how good a client we are and how are we facilitating your success and what we could do better.
yeah. And I think
that's probably not going to be the conversation that I would have had before talking to you, right? It would have been about how you lot doing.
yeah, and that's unfortunately how it does occur, and particularly in the contractor space. Like, I'm going to tell you how you went and all that kind of stuff. You know, and it's not about repeating your monitoring activities. It's about taking all of that information and distilling it into some kind of action, to be honest, and saying, look, we've done monitoring activities, and look, when I develop my procedures, there's a scoring mechanism in there, and I've got to tell you, it makes life really easy, because you end up with a bit more of an objective. Okay, they're in this band, and look, I must admit, people respond well to scores because you can plot over time how someone's going. So, you know, but really, when we're undertaking a review, we need to involve relevant parties. So not just ourselves. You know, we need to talk to others who have worked alongside the contractor, worked with the contractor, you know, getting their views and that input, so that we are getting a really diverse view. I mean, you know, things go wrong in the workplace. That's just reality. And we shouldn't base our performance review, you know, on one incident or one occurrence. It really should be, you know, aggregating that information to come to a picture about how this contractor is performing, and enabling them to review and discuss concerns, allowing them an explanation of performance, you know, why things went wrong, what actually contributed to it, or why, in fact, that yes, something may have gone wrong, but it avoided something really much worse going wrong. So, you know, we had a situation, the contractor may have had a situation that resulted in an incident, but through their actions, they actually avoided something much worse. And this is why be very wary of lag indicators. And I have colleagues where now basically they don't use lag indicators at all, because they can be such a false flag around, safety performance. And it's about looking underneath that. But involving relevant parties, reviewing and monitoring, outcomes, raising and discussing concerns. It is also an opportunity to restate expectations. And it reminds me of, that performance management with an underperforming worker, where you kind of go, okay, these were the expectations. This is what has occurred. These are our concerns. What do you want to contribute, and then how are we going to go forward? So it's a conversation and process. But unfortunately, if we haven't engaged with our contractor previously, and it has been, we're watching you, this can be very much, I'm having this done to me, and your degree of engagement won't be great.
Star chamber, right? You just feel like getting called to the headmaster's office for a telling off.
And look, and sadly, most of the time it only happens when something's gone wrong. We need to do it on a somehow kind of regular basis, end of project or 12 monthly, or deciding when, and looking at the factors like, okay, if it's a complex project with a complex scope and there's a high degree of risk involved in it, then we might undertake these activities more frequently. Whereas if it's low, and the contractor well, all those they're familiar with the workplace, all that kind of stuff. So we need to think about when we're going to do it, but make sure we do it. The world.
I suppose if you recall our previous webinars where that concept came up around the contractor relationship framework, and you're going to share an example of that with us. I wonder, is that a good time to start to think about performance review and monitoring frequencies?
Yeah, look, and it's a good point you make, because you kind of go with your category of contractor. You got labour hire, independent, skilled, appointed principal contractors, and then the rest of us. And you go, look, you would want to be undertaking, say with labour hire, you might have a worker who comes on site. They're working within your own workforce, and they're going to be there for an extended period of time. You'd probably just absorb them into your own existing staff performance reviews, if that's the case, or it might be okay, looking at the time frame that they're there. Whereas your independent skills, you might go, okay, this contractor is doing multiple different pieces of work, so at the end of each project, or we're going to be ongoing in the relationship. So it's really making sure, sadly, often with performance review, we do them manually, and it's not relevant, it's not effective. So really trying to customize that to what is the type of the category of contractor that you're using, and what is appropriate for the circumstances.
Totally. It reminds me of a kind of test and tag. So, because I'll do that every year. And in some cases, that's way too often. And in some cases, that's just not often enough, right?
I know. And the sad thing about that is it creates a set and forget. It's got a tag, it's been tested. Does anyone look at it and go, is it actually damaged?
No,
particularly.
We'll look at it in a year, Sue, don't worry.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And yet the day after it got tagged, someone drove over it and destroyed the plug, or, cut the I know. It does create.
The only thing that's remaining is the tag.
Yeah, exactly. But and so performance review needs to be flexible to accommodate the type of contractor, the relationship we've got, the scope of work, the degree of risk involved, all of those sort of things, so that we're doing it at a time that is meaningful. And so, one of the things that I'm going to jump to the next one around, we don't want to, as I said, get dragged into, we're just going to ask them about did you have any injuries, or did you have any incidents? What we actually want to do is look at our performance review criteria around those positive indicators. So what was their cooperation like when there was an incident? Were they upfront, honest, participative, open to discussion, raised issues, owned issues, all of that? you know, that cooperation in that process. You know, did they proactively identify actions that they could take to prevent reoccurrence of issues that are arisen, you know, and looking at things like, and did it reflect the hierarchy of control? So, you know, were all their incident investigations coming out with, oh, needs to take more care, you know, those kind of things. So, yeah.
And I suppose this calls out to what we've spoken about previously around these expectations. You know, if we think about affecting onboarding, where when, you know, we will say, here are what our expectations are for you, that are really based around the things that are important to us, and they tend to be outcomes based. Having line of sight through for those expectations through this process means that you could probably use your expectations in your performance review criteria, right? To see how well did this supplier of services meet our expectations that we've clearly communicated up front. We've monitored against those expectations. So, you know, almost like you could do the work for you, because it's just the same taxonomy stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. But things like timeliness of action, you know, so an issue has been identified, you've come to agreement on what the resolution is going to be. How timely was the implementation of that? So to me, the criteria should be much more around soft skills, about cooperation, openness, timeliness, you know, all of that kind of stuff, rather than whether or not they had an incident.
Yeah.
Because the whether or not you had an incident is just such a, as I said, blunt tool in terms of what does that actually mean. We do have, you know, we should include in our performance review things like score, you know, what scores did they achieve in the assurance activities we did, or the monitoring activities. So again, when I do work with clients, you know, there's a scorecard that says, all right, when you're out there doing monitoring, partially implemented, not implemented, partially implemented, fully implemented. So one of the, you know, criteria in the pre-qualification is that you'll have appropriate levels of supervision. Well, you know, while we've been engaging, I've come out on site and there's an apprentice there and the supervisor's nowhere to be seen. And the apprentice can't tell me who their supervisor is, and they don't have their phone number. And so that then gets put in, plugged into your assurance activities to say, well, there's a score that goes with that. So that's 0 because you had no implementation. Or, oh yeah, he's got his phone number and he's going to duck back in and see how he's going. And given the degree of risk, that's appropriately fully implemented. So we use the scores that we've achieved during our monitoring activity to transpose into our performance review. But the other thing as well is reports from others around them is really important. You know, what did other contractors working in the same area, your own workers, you know, can they confirm a positive safety culture and a prioritizing of safety? You know, were they cutting corners, all of that kind of stuff. So to me, yes, we have the scores, which give us an objectivity, but, you know, I just think these soft skills are really, really important, because it tells you throughout the relationship going forward, you're going to get cooperation around, you know, safety initiatives and improving safety over the journey.
I suppose really it kind of distills itself down to that both parties have got a requirement to collaborate, cooperate, communicate. And this is really about how well have we done collectively in meeting those obligations of, you know, how collaborative are you? How collaborative are we? Yeah. How clear is our communication? And these are the soft skills that flow out of that, right? Which is, you know, responding to things in a timely manner, you know, being cooperative rather than being grumpy. Because, you know, let's face it, we all know from a practical, realistic point of view, we know which contractors we don't want back based on how we got on.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. And were they able to accept feedback? Were they able to give feedback? You know, was it, you know, when you say, oh, look, are there any issues you'd like to raise? No, I just want to get out of here. So, you know, I just think that performance review, yes, part of it you can put a bit of objectivity around it, but a lot of it, to me, I'm just going to go back here. Sorry, I'm just missed that one. You know, we can use a scoring system. And look, and what I've sort of done in the monitoring templates I've developed, as I said, I've put in a scoring system to go, look, if you get a certain range of scores, then If you get, a 0, then there's a really poor performance here, and we need to really require them to go and get advice and support and all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you're in the middle, then, there's more engagement around, improvement plans, getting them to get qualified safety advice, all that sort of stuff. And then you get to a point where you go, well, actually, they're really performing well and they're prioritised for rehire. And you can also plot over time how they're going. And people actually respond really well to that stuff, because they look at it and go, oh, look, we got 55 in the last performance review, and that was great. And now we only got 35. What's going on? And it seems to be something that people can really sort of grab onto. And it makes it a bit more objective versus just sort of subjective feedback. And I think what's important as well is when there is poor performance or performance we're not happy with, is that, the consultant needs to go and get advice. We're not stepping in and going, okay, well, now we're going to tell you how to do it. And it may happen, but, again, we know what the risks are involved in that and what some of the downside can be. But yeah.
And I suppose that's worth calling out, that doesn't stop a client from supporting a small business that might not have access to resources, etc. Right? That's not what we're saying.
No,
but
absolutely.
we've discussed this before, right? It's about, that overreach from a client, which can have unintended negative consequences.
Yeah, and look, I had this conversation with a client yesterday, a very large, domestic builder, and they've been issuing swims to their contractors, and I'm like, rightio, we probably need to have a little look at that. And they're like, but how can we engage with? And I said, look, there are lots of ways engaging with contractors about learning and education. That doesn't mean you're taking control. Pointing them in the right direction of resources. Providing them with, you have the time and resources available to bring in experts that could share with that, but you stop short of saying, this is how I'm actually going to tell you what to do.
Yeah, it's a different with providing them a template for what might be missing out of their management program and filling it in for them, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So look, performance review, as I said, it is different to monitoring, because monitoring is the practical operational part of what is going on a day-to-day basis. And getting information about both parties, whereas performance review is a bit of a line in the sand to go, we need to be making some conscious decisions about whether to use this contractor on an ongoing basis. And yes, performance review is an opportunity for them to review your performance, but probably from a legal point of view, it really is more about saying we need to be able to weed out or deal with contractors that are not performing in a way that we want them to. So we don't have incidents and then go, yeah, we knew they were pretty bad, or we've been doing monitoring activities that were showing that they were not, not managing safety well or not performing well, but we didn't do anything about it.
And
I
have a question there,
yeah.
And it's a fairly emotive one, and you might not even have an answer for it, but going around the traps and talking to contractors in various contexts, there's always this tacit knowledge between people in client organizations that are engaging contractors, other contractors. They all seem to know who this minority of bad apples are, right? We all know who these contractors are. Their names come up. People get a reputation, and I think one of the frustrating challenges when I've spoken to people is, if only we'd have known that everybody else knew that this contractor was a problem. Have you seen that kind of problem being dealt with in a realistic kind of practical way? It seems to be a tricky area.
And look, I do think what happens is it does get factored in an informal way. So, when you're talking about whether to hire a contractor or not, look, we don't reckon they're very good. And when they were here last and Joe Blow saw blah. So it's an informal process where we do have that information floating around. And as I said, so sadly, after serious incidents, often the comment will be, we knew that was going to go wrong, because they're just really whatever. But it's underground. You know, it's rumor, it's this, it's that, and no one's really speaking out, and no one's really. This is an objective, transparent process where we're bringing all that to the surface, and that's why it's, you know, the involve relevant parties, which is, you know, having a chat to people that work in the vicinity of or directly with contractors, particularly your own workers, because they're going to feel less. Other contractors might feel a bit like, oh, I don't want to bag them off, I don't want to get involved, I don't want to, you know, if it gets out I've said the wrong thing, then, you know, it's going to create World War II.
And there's
But
the sliding scale where some people have got an axe to grind, right? They're
yeah,
you know, having to bag the competitor in the view that makes them look better.
yeah,
So I suppose we have to
exactly.
be careful with that type
Yeah,
of
exactly. So, but, you know, definitely where you have your own staff working alongside contractors. And, you know, I've worked with some very large organisations that have, you know, big contractor contingencies as well as their own staff actually working very much side by side. And, you know, their own workers were very forward in saying, oh, no, they're hopeless. They don't wear their PPE. They don't do this. They don't do that. And that information's gold, really gold. So think outside of just, I'm here talking to the contractor. You know, it's about gathering that information from other sources, looking at your monitoring outcomes over time as well. You know, everyone has, as I'm saying, can have a bad day. But looking at, you know, if you're doing your assurance activities and your engagement activities and your conversations, and to me, you know, I just think it's so much about the relationship. You know, these factors around, you know, cooperation, willingness to be proactive, willingness to go, yep, we know we didn't do that so great, so what we're going to do is this. You know, that is just gold as well. You know, rather than, oh, look, I came out and, you know, you didn't have this many cords tested and you didn't have the, you know, those more hard things that are easier to see, but I just think less meaningful.
Yeah. And I suppose the only kind of missing link to that is there's a reminder that those that do really well probably should tell them.
Yeah. Oh God, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we have to be, you know, the pat on the back when it's well deserved. And this is the thing, because as I said, generally what happens with performance review, it only happens when shit hits the fan. So we need to change that and go, no, we're actually doing this at various intervals, you know, to be determined by whatever criteria, whether it's certain points in time or in response to, you know, the end of a job or whatever it might be. And we don't just do it in response to a negative event, because also if it's done in response to a negative event, you're not going to get the cooperation, because they know I'm sitting in this seat because something's gone wrong and I'm going to get punished. Or that's the perception. Whereas if it's something that occurs throughout the relationship, it's like, oh, I've had these conversations before and we're able to be honest, we're able to raise issues. So it normalizes the process. Whereas, you know, if you go, right, well, you just had a serious incident, get in here and we're going to do our first and only ever performance review process. It's not going to be, you know, the contractor's going to be there going, storm, not going to say anything, you know.
And I know we've got one analogy in common around contract health and safety management, because we've spoken about it before, which is this idea about dating to forming relationships. And what came in my mind is that, you know, if you want a long-term relationship with a partner, then maybe having these conversations more often about how this is going and what can I do to support you more and what can you do to support me more is one of the keys to a healthy long-term relationship with a person.
Oh, there is nothing
worse. Right?
There is nothing worse than I just got home and I go, we need to have a conversation. Those words.
We know what that means. It's not you, it's me.
Exactly. We need to have a conversation. That is just the precursor, particularly if we haven't had conversations throughout. You know, we don't really, as I say, talk about things, you know, raise issues, be positive, you know, give feedback on a regular basis. All that, when it's suddenly out of the blue, we need to have a conversation. Well, we know that that's not gonna, you know, that's not heading in a particularly positive direction. So yeah, it really is about, you know, using your outcomes of your monitoring exercises, do something with them, coagulate them, bring them into a point and say, right, you know, we've looked at these things over time and this is where, you know, we feel like we're at. Think about lead and lag performance indicators. You know, as I said, I think at the end of the day, the bottom line is we want less people injured, and that is a number. And I sort of feel a lot of the time that when all is said and done, you cannot get away from it. But understand that, do not use it as the only source of information. Understand it's contextualized. Understand there needs to be a whole bunch of other information about it. And very much look for those kind of lead indicators about cooperation, communication, willingness to change, proactivity, consultation around issue resolution, all of that kind of stuff, and get feedback from sources outside of your direct relationship. So their own workers, other contracts, client, user, all that kind of stuff, to, get a bigger picture of what is actually going on with this contractor. So it really is about, but I think the biggest feedback is do it, because it doesn't get done.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, Sue, and I suppose it's a final question for me, really, which is that from what you've spoke about around review, it actually doesn't look that complicated.
No.
Seems to be a fairly straightforward concept. And I think if it's done well, it provides lots of opportunity for learning for both clients and for contractors, which is good, and sort of can engender a good long-term relationship we discussed. So why do you think it is that this isn't done? What do you think are the barriers?
Look, I think time. I think people, it's a soft skill kind of thing, or it's in that realm of nice to do. Oh, I've just got about 25 kangaroos going out the front of my office window through the paddock. Amazing. Look, I think it's just one of those things that's aspirational. People go, oh, that'd be great to do. That'd be great to do. But, I don't feel the pinch on it. And, in safety, I mean, at the end of the day, everything kind of does distill down to those hard events. And the question, a serious incident happens. So the regulator says, well, what did you do to come out and supervise and inspect and monitor and all that? It's sort of not something that's focused on. And just time. People just go, I'm so busy, and yes, I'd love to do it, but they don't. And it's an interesting thing, because you go, well, obviously there isn't it doesn't feel like it's valuable. And I think, where it becomes valuable is that you end up with a better caliber of contractors, because you do actually make decisions about, well, you're in and you're out. And as you say, you get a much better relationship going forward, but these things take time.
Yeah.
I think we are all excruciatingly time poor.
Well, I think we've done that, right? I think we've done review. And I've also, for, one of those moments in my life where I've heard the most Australian thing ever, which is to stop the conversation and go, hey, I've got 25 kangaroos going past my window.
Yeah, they just went down on the river flat, and I reckon there was about 25 of them. And off they went. They're beautiful. Yeah, they're gorgeous.
Wow. That's the time we wish you had a camera pointing the other way, but never mind.
I know, exactly.
We missed out. So, as always, I just think you're amazing. I really love your perspective around contract health and safety management. And I also find your perspective to be structured and actually easy to understand. And what I'm hoping is that people like I have really appreciate these 4 webinars and providing some clarity on what is tough, particularly for health and safety practitioners and professionals. A tough, can be quite a grey area. Difficult to understand how, whether we're doing the right thing, and always done well intended, but sometimes we find it's not quite hitting the mark. Our relationship to the contractors aren't great. We've talked to death about the problems with pre-qualification and overzealous approaches to that. So I really appreciate that, because I think these 4 conversations we had hopefully will do some good for some people and really help them in their own journeys of getting this right. So thanks very much.
Look, thank you. It's great. And I mean, I've done a bit of work with some clients in New Zealand. I'd love to do more. And, there's a lot of similarities between the jurisdictions, and the case law is essentially the same. And yeah, I mean, look, I'm a very practical person. I have a very short attention span, so I tend to do things in ways that I can, process it. But I do encourage people to watch all 4. You know, I think that you need the context to understand, what does the law say? You know, what should the relationship look like, and how does the relationship progress through the 4 elements, because they all belong. You have to do all 4. And I do encourage people to watch all 4, and just take the practical stuff away and just go, okay, I'm just going to see how we are going in our own organization. But look, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great. And I just want to say, John and I are working on a publication here in Australia, which I think is going to be amazing. And yeah, look, my aim always has been to demystify this area of safety and law, because it's been an area that's been very misunderstood for a long time. And anything we can do to improve that, amazing.
That's brilliant. And so one last question, Sue, if any of the people watching this want to get in touch with you, because they might need more help or want to know more detail about certain aspects.
There we go.
There we go. You've answered my question in the slide. So if anyone wants to get hold of Sue, there's her contact details. You'll be able to press pause there and write that down or do a screenshot of it.
And I'm on LinkedIn, so just Google me. I pop up. You know, I do quite a bit of stuff on LinkedIn. I don't post as much as I should. Should post more, but I don't. I don't know. I just post when there's something really important to say. But yes, by all means, get in touch. I often have phone calls with clients and just have a good old chinwag about what their circumstances are, and just help them nut a few things through. So always happy.
That's brilliant. That's really cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So thank you, Sue. We'll end it there, and hopefully I'll see you very soon.
That'd be great. Okay, thanks, John.
Take care.
Bye.